Hi everyone and welcome again in my studio. I've seen many videos on the internet that explain how to sharpen wood carving chisels, knives, scissors and other sharp objects. But I haven't come across too many videos that explain how to sharpen stone carving chisels. So, following the philosophy that if something is not there, then make it yourself, I decided to dedicate a series only to sharpening stone carving chisels. And in this video, I'll show you how to sharpen the point chisel. The point chisel is the workhorse of stone carving. About 80% of the stone that is removed during the process of making a sculpture is done with the point chisel. Needless to say that during this process, you will need to sharpen the chisel a countless amount of times. So it's important to know the principles behind the art of sharpening chisels. Let's start with the material of the chisel. As you might already know, chisels can come in two different materials. They can be either fashioned out of steel, and in this case the point of the chisel has been hardened through a heat treatment, or they can consist of a metal rod wherein a much harder alloy has been inserted into the tip. In this case they are called carbide tipped chisels. Since steel and carbide are two different alloys, they require different sharpening methods. So let's start by looking at the steel chisels. As the name suggests, hardened steel has gone through a series of heat treatments called hardening and tempering. During this process, the metal has been brought up to a specific temperature. At different temperatures, the molecular structure of the steel changes, and with each different molecular structure, the mechanical properties of the steel change as well. After bringing the steel up to a specific temperature and reaching the desired microstructure, the chisel is then immediately cooled down by quenching it in water or oil. What this abrupt cooling down does is that it basically freezes the molecules in their position, allowing the steel to maintain the mechanical properties of that specific microstructure. Knowing this, one of the risks of sharpening hardened steel chisels on a bench grinder is that the chisel will heat up a lot. And if the heat goes above a specific temperature, the microstructure of the steel will change again and it will lose its hardness. You may even burn the steel. For the sake of demonstration, I deliberately burned this chisel to show you how that looks like. As you can see, a color progression has appeared on the metal. Each color stands for a specific temperature. And the progression also shows how the heat behaved through the metal. You have to realize that once the heat is generated, it will look for a way to escape the metal. And it will always head towards the part with less resistance, which is the part with less metal. So in this case, it's the point. The heat will head towards it, and as it passes through the metal, it will change its microstructure. At this stage, the steel has become soft again, and you cannot use it anymore to carve, as it will lose its sharpness almost immediately after contact with stone. Once you burn a chisel, there is not much you can do about it unless you know a blacksmith that can sharpen it and harden it back again for you. So what you can do to avoid this is to regularly dip the chisel in water during the sharpening process. This will keep the temperature of the steel low and avoid the issue of overheating the metal. I keep a container of water next to the grinding wheel, and you will see how often I dip the chisel in it during the sharpening process. What I aim at is to always have a drop of water on the point of the chisel while grinding. This will indicate me that the temperature is still relatively low. If the temperature raises, that drop of water will evaporate. Now, all what I have just explained relates to hardened steel chisels. Carbide chisels, on the other hand, live by other principles. Carbide is a very hard alloy and it can withstand extremely high temperatures. Therefore, when sharpening them on a grinding wheel, you don't need to cool them down. Actually, you must not cool them down because carbide cannot stand the shock of an abrupt temperature change. If subjected to that shock, they will develop cracks and will eventually break during the carving process. So when sharpening carbide chisels, never cool them down in water. If they get too hot, just lay them aside and let them cool down slowly. Now that we have talked about the material of the chisel, let's look at the shape of the point. The point has four sides and is pyramidal in shape. The edges between the sides must be very clean. When looked closely, you will see that the point has a slight wide angle just behind the tip. This will allow it to enter deeper into the stone and remove more material at once. The angle of the point varies depending on the stone that you're carving on and on the technique that you're using. When carving on harder stones, the angle should be wide in order to provide strength to the point, while when carving softer stones, the angle can be narrower. While sharpening the chisel, you should regularly check its point from the top. Look straight into it, and what you must aim for is a shape that looks like a perfect plus sign. Okay, we've looked at the material and the shape of the chisel. Let me now show you how to actually sharpen them on the bench grinder. I've seen many people sharpening point chisels like this, but I think that by doing that, you will generate a lot of heat on the point and it will eventually burn. Also, as the wheel is round, you will not be able to touch the whole surface of the edge, but only a slight section, while what we aim for is a perfectly straight surface. So it's a better practice to hold the chisel horizontally, parallel to the width of the grinding wheel. Bench grinders often have a little platform placed in front of the most projecting part of the wheel. I use this to help me keep the chisel straight by placing it on the platform. I then adjust the angle at which I place the chisel on the platform. This will affect the angle of the point. I then go back and forth to sharpen the whole surface of that side of the point. To have a full control over all this data, a top view is essential. So when I sharpen point chisels, I place myself above the grinding wheel and I look at what's happening at the point of contact between the tip of the chisel and the grinding wheel. Don't work for too long on one side only. What I usually do is regularly switch from one face to another to avoid too much heat being generated on that side, and also to make sure that the point is well centered with the axis of the chisel. Also, don't forget to keep the chisel cooled down by regularly dipping it in water. Now, let me show you how all this looks like. As you have seen, I regularly switch side, I kept the chisel wet, and I also regularly checked the tip of the point from above. Now that we have the basic shape, it's time to put in the wider angle that sits just at the top of the chisel. It's basically the same process, but much faster, and the angle at which you hold the chisel with respect to the grinding wheel is wider. For this step, I also prefer to use the grinding wheel with a finer grain. What I have basically done here is that I slightly widened the tip of the chisel. This will make it stronger and more efficient when entering the marble. I have placed this change in angle on the continuation of the face of the point, and it looks like this. What some people also like to do is to place that change in angle not on the continuation of the flat side of the point, but at an angle of 45 degrees to it, and it looks like this. Now, I think this is a personal preference, but it must be said that by adopting this method, you actually double the number of the edges on the point, and this might be more effective for the removal of stone. Sharpening carbide-tipped point chisels is basically done in the same way, but you must remember never to cool them down by dipping them in water. And another thing that you need to know is that carbide point chisels are used to carve granite and harder stones. And in these cases, the sharp edges on the point are not effective. Therefore, you must not sharpen the point in a pyramidal shape, but more in a cone-like shape. You can do this easily by constantly rotating the chisel while in contact with the grinding wheel. Now, while explaining the process of sharpening chisels with a bench grinder, I've warned you about some issues that you might encounter. First, the risk of burning the steel due to the heat generated. Second, the fact that the grinding wheel is round, so it will not allow you to touch the full surface of one of the sides of the point. Third, the rust. So to avoid all these problems, I prefer to sharpen chisels by hand on a flat sharpening stone. Flat grinding stones come in different sizes and different materials. I personally prefer the larger ones as they are heavier and you can put more pressure onto them without them sliding away. I have natural stones like those used for sharpening wood carving chisels and other sharp tools like kitchen knives and scissors. Maybe you didn't know this, but in ancient times sculptors used to sharpen their chisels directly onto the stone. They used to rub their chisels on the stone surface until the desired sharpness was achieved. And what this would eventually do is leave a groove on the stone surface as well. And you can still see traces of this in ancient quarries. This is also the case with more modern sharpening stones like this one. And you can see here that a whole series of grooves have developed on the surface of the stone. Another more modern variant is a simple flat stone onto which diamond sanding paper has been attached. Diamond grit is very durable and efficient and allows you to shape the tip of the chisel relatively quickly. This is my preferred method for sharpening all kinds of chisels, because I can avoid all the issues I've just told you about and because of the higher level of control that I have over the sharpening process. So let me show you how to use such a stone. The basic principle remains the same. We need to aim for that perfectly flat surface on each side of the point. You can do this easily by placing the flat side on the stone, feeling the right angle, and simply go back and forth. I tend to count the number of times I go back and forth for each side, and then switch sides and repeat. While going back and forth, be careful not to raise the tip too much, as you might risk cutting through the diamond paper, as I have done here, 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 and here. This might seem a much longer process than sharpening your chisels on the bench grinder, but in fact, if you take good care of them and always keep them sharp, this will not take too much of your time. I also believe that the tranquility and almost trance-like state of mind one reaches while doing the repetitive movement is more in harmony with the idea of carving stone by hand. Now, if you remember in the episode where I showed you how to use the point chisel, I talked about this mushroom-like shape that develops due to the hammer blows. This is dangerous. The curves that develop might break off and injure you or someone else near you. So it's important to remove them as soon as they develop. You can do this easily on the bench grinder. Just turn it on. Eye protection, ear protection, and place the back end of the chisel against the wheel. And keep rotating the chisel while going back and forth. The back and forth movement is important to avoid developing a groove on the flat wheel. That would make sharpening other chisels very annoying. The wheel always needs to stay flat. And there you go, the chisel as good as new. Okay, this was it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video and that the information I shared was useful. If so, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. And if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, please leave them here below and I'll be more than happy to check them out for you. As always, I'm Adar Jaber and I'll see you next time.